Welcome, heroes of the Horde and adventurers of the Alliance. My name is Weirdo, and today we're talking about beginnings. 4 years have passed since the mortal races stood together against the might of the Burning Legion. Though Azeroth was saved, the tenuous pact between the Horde and the Alliance has all but evaporated. The drums of war thunder once again. How many of you remember the first time you ever logged in to World of Warcraft? The music, the cinematic, the old Blizzard launcher, the 5 to 7 discs you had to install one by one, the sight of the dark portal greeting you as you entered. I don't know about you guys, but me and my friends used to have download parties every expansion. We'd order pizza, share a few 2-liters, play some Halo, maybe watch a movie, and then every time we changed a disc, we would cheer like hooligans at a match. I think we even snuck in a few shots here and there as we got older. Nights like that kind of stick out in my memory. I imagine most of you can remember the first time you ever set foot in Azeroth. For me, it was in Dunmoreau. The world felt cold and harsh, even a little alien. I killed boars to make myself a pair of gloves, marveled that the gloves actually appeared on my stubby little fingers. Then I wandered up the path and found my first inn. It was warm and inviting, and I could almost feel the heat of the fire warming my bones through the cold laptop screen. And this is extra silly given the fact that I was in Florida and it was probably 80 plus degrees outside before humidity. What about you, Hargan?
Oh yeah, I vividly remember my first time playing. I had just gotten WoW as a Christmas present, and I popped the first disc into my computer and proceeded to install it for the rest of the night. Then the next day, I downloaded and installed more updates. Finally, I decided to roll a Tauren warrior with my stepfather, who rolled a Tauren druid. I remember we tried to stick together, but pretty quickly we got lost and separated. You know, the massive rolling hills of Mulgore, every rock, tree, or new enemy was something fun and new to discover. Also, maybe this is why I gravitated towards PvP, but I remember when I first got to Bloodhoof Village, I saw a strange cougar running around on a bridge. It didn't move like other NPCs, and it had a red nameplate, so I ran up and I attacked it, and I was instantly killed by a hunter, and then camped for the next hour. Good times.
Whether you were traveling the quiet paths surrounded by the lush greens of Elwyn, stalking through the brush in the dense indigo glades of Teldrassil, taking your first proud steps into the harsh red sands of Durotar, or even striking back against the horror in the pallid fog of Tirisfal, those first few steps, they were everything. Now, I know not all of us started at the same time. Perhaps you were greeted by Earl Bowen or Liam O'Brien when you first logged in instead of... Wait, Hargan, who voiced the original intro cinematic?
I believe that would be Debbie Mae West.
Maeve Shadow Song. Seriously? Oh well, no matter whose voice welcomed you into the world, or if you started in Eversong Woods or Gilneas City, we all had a beginning, and it's a beginning that sets the tone for all that follows. But then again, those weren't really the first steps. Were they? There is one part of our story that we're forgetting about. The first vital step in the story of the player. Spending 40 minutes in Character Creator deciding which ugly scowl you wanted your face to wear at all times. These were our mains, our tunes, our cares, our alts. Whatever you called them, they were us, our avatars. And they let us walk with them through this incredible world that we had no idea we'd spend 20 years in. In a lot of ways, they kind of became our friends. Maybe that's just me being sentimental, but I remember imagining the personalities of each one of my characters, and it helped pull me into the world. Before we really get going, I want to disclaim right away that there's no chance we get to the end of vanilla in one video. World of Warcraft as a game delivers its stories through the vehicles of its patches and expansions, and while WoW would eventually set a cycle of expansions every 2 years and a groove of 3 patches per expansion, WoW's vanilla cycle happened over 3 years and had a whopping 12 patches. Now this may sound dramatic, and it is, but not all of these were major story patches. For example, did you know that Maridon and Dire Maul were not initially available at launch? They each had their own introduction patch. Patch 1.10, an even better example, was called The Storms of Azeroth, and was so named because the team had managed to implement weather effects, and honestly, they were just really proud of them. There's also a 1.12 titled The Drums of War, which did little else besides introduce cross-realm battlegrounds in which, believe it or not, I actually hadn't known about until after I came up with the title for this video. When all's said and done, there's roughly 6 or 7 major content patches in vanilla. That's still double the length of your standard expansion experience, and to reiterate, far more than a single video can cover. So for today, we'll set our expectations to something manageable. At the moment, my map for vanilla will take us roughly 3 videos to get through. I'll explain more about them as we go, but for today's visit, we'll be focusing mainly on making new friends. Primarily 6. The reason for this is that the story in vanilla takes place largely along 6 rapidly converging lanes, 3 for the Horde and 3 for the Alliance. See, sometime between the closing cinematic of Warcraft 3 and the opening cinematic of World of Warcraft, the 4 factions that we'd gotten to know had been wheeling and dealing, forging new compacts that folded Warcraft 3's 4 factions back into the original 2. At first, this might sound like a step backwards, but in the end, it was actually pretty dynamic. The Night Elves, who had stood shoulder to shoulder with both the humans and the orcs on the slopes of Mount Hyjal, but who may or may not still feel a bit sore over the murder of their greatest demigod,
Boom! 1-0 Cenarius.
chose to integrate themselves into the Noble Grand Alliance, while the Forsaken, the faction of rebellious undead who split from the Scourge after Illidan attempted to melt the ice caps and weakened the Lich King's control over their mind, joined with Thrall's new horde, because the humans thought they were smelly.
We'll take one badass Banshee Queen, please. Wait, no.
Funnily enough, in modern times, several decades later, we do actually have an explanation for the Horde-Forsaken union involving Hamel Rune Totem of all people, which sort of brings me to my first point. I want this joining of the Night Elves and the Forsaken to the Alliance and the Horde, respectively, to be shown on screen, so to speak. You have to understand that it's more than just a function of gameplay to unify these 4 bodies into 2. The narrative choice to simplify the factions back to the classic flavors of human and orc fundamentally alters the culture of both, and in my opinion, that was for the better. But either way, it's a change that can't be written off as a between-season shakeup. Before this point in Warcraft, you could look at the Alliance and the Horde and easily think of them as homogenized cultures. To put that differently, both represented roughly one perspective. Of the 8 races now present in vanilla, the dwarves and the gnomes largely share a culture, differentiating in little more than nuance until a bit later on. And this shared culture aligns very well with the culture of Warcraft's humans. Blizzard themselves have said that they consider the Alliance to be their lawful good faction, and apart from a few bad apples, this is pretty incontestable. But by adding the Night Elves into the mix, you add a touch of the primal and the chaotic, a splash of violet and green amidst the blue and gold. At least, that's how Warcraft 3's Night Elves were portrayed, and in this project, we're going to do our best to keep them that way. More on that later. Then, on the parallel, the cultures of the Horde, established in Warcraft 3, all align through the concepts of strength and honor. They're still largely good, but in a more unruly way. The Orc clans embody this philosophy best post-Manaroth, but the Darkspear trolls and the united Tauren tribes of Mulgore also embrace it while adding their own unique flavors. By contrast, the Forsaken are more reserved, valuing cunning and pragmatism over integrity. To them, results justify means, and if examined too closely, this can put them at odds with the rest of the Horde's culture. Yet at the same time, if we accept that the Forsaken are actually devoted to the Horde in earnest, it makes their relationship to their peers even more intriguing, in some ways even endearing. It's incredible that something that causes such a fundamental shift is never explored or even acknowledged in the game. Which is why one of the first changes we'll be making to Vanilla's story will be to add in a moment for each faction to acknowledge this new connection. We'll dive more deeply into that in the next video, but I wanted to bring it up here since it's relevant to the next part of our discussion. Earlier I mentioned that the story of WoW at launch begins in 6 different paths, and from there the experience is pushed, not so much by the story, but by the draw of the world and its different explorable zones and regions. There were 40 zones available at launch in Classic, split between the world's first 2 continents, Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. This demonstrates another benefit of the Horde and the Alliance's diversification of culture. Each continent has 3 of those 6 lanes, and each faction is given a 2-to-1 ratio on their respective continent. The Eastern Kingdom bends more toward the Alliance, with the humans in the south and the dwarves and gnomes in the middle, but with the Forsaken occupying the north. Through them, the Horde are granted access to the narrative potential of this continent. The same is true of Kalimdor, the Tauren are the farthest south, with the Orcs and the Trolls only slightly more northward. And finally, the Night Elves grant the same access to the west for the Alliance that the Forsaken do for the Horde in the east. This not only provides a strong in-world justification for their alliances, but also creates a symmetry that sends happy signals to the deep parts of my brain that appreciates patterns. Over the years, there have been callbacks and references to all 6 different starting experiences. To be honest, we didn't even realize how many references there were until we were recording this video. But that makes them vital to the storytelling of WoW as a whole. So we intend to create a character for each starting zone, and we'll follow each one through their respective journey. However, since the idea of creating characters to take the place of anonymous champions of Azeroth has drawn apprehension from some of you, Hargan included, I've made this its own video. It will likely be shorter than the others that will follow to cover vanilla, and if that's not your thing, you can always just hit the skip button, and we will understand. But if I may advocate just a little on behalf of my methods in madness, I've also tried to use these characters to each highlight a different little obscure piece of lore, so that those of you who are here for the story might still get something out of it. Each of these tidbits is something I can't really see myself introducing to the story elsewhere. On the flip side, for those of you who intend to follow along in this series and imagine yourselves partaking in our rewritten timeline with your own feet on the ground, feel free to think of these characters as names on your friend list or even guild officers. The latter is particularly fitting since we'll be making a guild for both sides as well. Anyway, I've danced around the subject for long enough. Let's get into character creation. The primary point of contact for both factions going forward will be a human paladin and an orc shaman. It's common knowledge that these 2 classes were originally faction-locked in vanilla, which I think makes them ideal paragons to embody the respective cultures of either side. Paladins, for example, are the embodiment of that lawful good ideology that Blizzard attributes to the Alliance. Disciplined masters of war and devout priests of the Holy Light all rolled into one package. In Warcraft, Paladins trace their roots back to the Second War, when the Order of the Silver Hand was founded to combat the Horde's twisted fell magics. The idea is credited to Archbishop Alonsus Fowl, WoW's original Pope allegory, who took on 5 disciples at the start of the Second War. These were no small names either. There was Uther the Lightbringer of both Warcraft 2 and 3 fame, followed by Tyrion Fordring, who would one day wield the Ashbringer and help us bring down the Lich King. Sidon Dathrohan, the founder of the Scarlet Crusade, was next, and finally Turalion, lieutenant and successor to Anduin Lothar, who would go on to fight demons in outer space.
Hold on a second. You said 5.
Did I? Oh, right. Who could forget? Gavinrad the Dire, famous for, nothing. Yeah, Gavinrad unfortunately doesn't get very much. This isn't to say he has no lore. He was the only one of the 5 to originally be from the Kingdom of Stormwind, and he accompanied Lothar and Khadgar during the flight to Lordaeron while protecting the refugees. He appears only briefly in Warcraft 3, where he is slain personally by Arthas alongside Uther, defending the ashes of King Taranis Menethil. And that's all he gets, which when you compare his pedigree to the other 4, feels like a bit of a shame. So, what if there were a way to carry on his name? What if Gavinrad the Dire had a son? The first of our characters for this series, Jorn Gavinrad, or Jorn the Redeemer, was raised in Lordaeron and dreamt of following in his father's footsteps by becoming a paladin. But he never forgot his father's love for their homeland, and so upon his coming of age, he journeyed south to aid in the rebuilding of Stormwind, and specifically Northshire Abbey. Jorn's counterpart, our Orc Shaman, will have to similarly embody what it means to be a shaman. But this question is a bit more tricky. After all, what exactly does it mean to be a shaman in WoW? Well, centrally it means to commune with nature, but in a distinctly different way from druids. Shamans are attuned to the land itself as opposed to the life that lives upon it, and for a long time the Horde had actually lost touch with this shamanistic culture. But there was a time when each clan had a shaman, and that shaman's role, beyond communicating with the elements, was to protect the customs and traditions of its clan. Of the original Horde, 14 clans were considered prominent, and each one had their own unique culture. The Frost Wolves, the Dragonmaw, and the Warsong all embraced the primal, some through their savage nature, others through their bond to their animal companions. The Shattered Hand and the Bleeding Hollow both had their sacrificial mutilation rituals. The Blackrock and the Blacktooth Grin both embraced their industry and their ambition. The Twilight's Hammer, the Shadow Moon, and the Storm Reavers all embodied devotion to a darker power. The Cannibalistic Bone Chewers and the insane Laughing Skull both embraced being assholes for fun, while the Burning Blade were allegedly the sole clan to produce Blade Masters. Last but not least, there was the Thunderlord clan, known for finding the biggest, scariest, most dangerous monsters, tracking them, hunting them down, and then either killing them or dying in the attempt. I could spend all day exploring the cultures of these early clans, but that could easily triple the length of this video. One interesting fact, though, is that by now, in modern times, we know the fate of nearly all of these clans except for one. Many, like the Frostwolves of the Warsong, were folded into the greater New Horde underneath Thrall, while some, like the Blackrock, would go on to become antagonists. In certain cases, some would even evolve their clan into a different purpose. The Shattered Hand became the Horde's spy ring, directly countering Stormwind's SI-7. The Twilight Hammer, on the other hand, famously became a doomsday cult, worshipping the old gods, and the Storm Reavers, in our story, have gone on to become a pirate fleet. Some clans were even wiped out and or turned into fell orcs by the shattering of Outland, like the Bone Chewers or the Shadow Moons. This is allegedly true of the Thunderlord as well, except that they are strangely absent in-game. Their stronghold on Outland is inhabited only by ogres. We have no named Thunderlord NPCs to fight, and the spirits of those that we do meet are presented as brown, not green. This same absence holds true for the clan's chief, Fenris Wolfbrother, a character who, as I understand it, was recently revealed to be Thrall's paternal uncle for whatever reason. Uniquely, Fenris remains the only Second War-era chieftain to be entirely unaccounted for in modern lore. An AU version of him is fought in Warlords of Draenor, but it's pretty inconsistent with his established character, that of an older veteran who longed for the glory days when orcs were still brown and valued honor. He was last seen returning through the dark portal to Draenor, and I suppose you could infer he died as the planet was torn apart, but...
Oh yeah, here it comes.
What if he didn't? What if, like the other veterans of his time, such as Sarfang, Eitrigg, or Drekthar, Fenris sought to reclaim his honor and the honor of his clan by passing along his customs to the next generation? Moments before Khadgar would destroy the dark portal, what if Fenris Wolfbrother, realizing all was lost, tried to save as much of his clan as he could, and in the end was only able to save one, an orcish child by the name of Magus Coldeye, was carried by Fenris through the Dark Portal to be raised as the last of the Thunderlord clan. Though a warrior at heart, she honors the duty left to her by her chieftain, and so takes on the role of clan shaman. She's made it her sworn oath to uphold the customs and traditions of the Thunderlords by finding the biggest possible monsters our world has to offer, and slaughtering them for her fallen ancestors' glory. Fenris himself would live just long enough to witness the founding of Durotar, keeping his head down and dying comfortably with the knowledge that his people had again found a home. Magus at this point sets out into the Valley of Trials, seeking to test her mettle and to forge a new legend, both for herself and for the Thunderlord clan. These two will be considered our central point of contact for their respective narratives. Our story becomes one of two found families, but in this moment, they have yet to do the finding. These are the main two stories, but as I mentioned, Vanilla WoW ostensibly begins with 6. The Tauren and the Gnome/Dwarf zones are sort of the step-headed red children of the ensemble, each being considered sort of an attaché for the respective central race of the faction. The Tauren and the Orcs even both share the same secondary starting zone, though each race does have a distinctive kit and identity. From a narrative vantage, they're treated more as a facet than as a separate component. Now that said, I don't really consider that to be all that negative. In many ways, it serves to strengthen the sense of cohesion in the greater factions. Starting with the Tauren, it's sort of difficult to dig out obscure lore facts, considering what we see is kind of all there is. As a race, the Tauren possess the least lore expansions from launch. Although, then again, it's possible that the reason we know so little about them is because of the existence of the Longwalkers. Most people wouldn't expect that the nomadic minotaurs based on North American native tribes would have a group of secret agents, but that's more or less exactly what the Longwalkers are. A group of Taurens sworn exclusively to Cairn Bloodhoof, who carry messages and protect secrets entrusted solely to them and which Cairn has kept from the rest of the Horde, even Thrall. In canon lore, they're mainly used as messengers, but for our story, they'll be used for anything Cairn requires, the secret hand of the High Chieftain. Our point of view for the Tauren, Kel Stonebull, once a student of Hamel Rune Totem, chose loyalty to his people and to the Earth Mother over the teachings of Cenarius and the Call of the Emerald Dream. Accompanied at all time by his animal companions, mainly a scruffy-looking wyvern named Stump, Kel embraces the natural wilds as a hunter and serves his people as a longwalker for Cairn Bloodhoof. After ending his time with the Cenarian Circle and returning from the Moonglade, he finds himself at peace atop Red Cloud Mesa when a call from Cairn rouses him to save the High Chieftain's only son, Bane, from the threat of the Centaurs. That brings us to the Dwarfs and the Gnome story. I chose a gnome for this one, a little because I'm partial to them. They were my first race. But also, while Tauren might get the least expanded lore, gnomes probably get the least content. The gnomes and the trolls in vanilla really didn't have much going for them. Neither had a capital city or their own starting zone, and they wouldn't receive much acknowledgement until the end of Wrath. That said, the dwarves don't really get much love either, and in the end, it ultimately came down to class choice. Our gnomish POV will be one Dexter Dazzlespring, mage extraordinaire. A former member of both the Kirin Tor and the Tinkers Union, after the fall of both Dalaran and Nomergon, Dexter finds himself in want of a home. Fleeing the toxic irradiated gas, he lands on his heels in Cold Ridge Valley. Shell-shocked after witnessing the fall of yet another homeland, he braves the winter wilds of Dun Morrow, seeking a new purpose. There's not really a lot more I can add here, but it gives him a link to the Kirin Tor in the same way Kel gets a link to the Cenarian Circle. These two are really meant to be more blank slates, and there is a reason. A less well-defined character can often be shallow, but it can also allow them to be flexible. That makes them feel less important than the others, but their lack of definition can also allow them to comfortably slot into any role the narrative requires. The other four will often feel more locked into their personalities. It's a result of strong cultures. But Dexter and Kel can go wherever we need them to, and that makes them a useful tool for a storyteller. While these two characters can act in the role of support, the last pair of the Six Paths, the Night Elves and the Forsaken, occupy the role of foil, both to their own faction, but also to the opposing faction. The Orcs' primary narrative conflict in vanilla is with the Night Elves, who by acting as the guardians of the forest they've protected for centuries, put themselves between the Orcs and the resources required to build their new nation. While the humans fight against the Forsaken undead, who could be seen to be defiling the lands of Lordaeron, but in reality are the risen bodies of its original inhabitants. On the Night Elven side of this divide, we have Theta Saberfang, a priestess of Elune and former member of the Moonguard. The Moonguard were once an organization of Night Elven sorcerers who held themselves as separate from the Highborn. They accepted all kinds, regardless of birth, though they did look down on any mages who were not members of their ranks. They were considered the guardians of the ancient Kaldori Empire and were commanded by Kurtalos Ravencrest, and then eventually Illidan Stormrage and Jared Shadowsong. During the War of the Ancients, they were a central pillar of the Kaldori resistance, and they waged a bitter war against the demons. However, after the Sundering and the vilification of arcane magic by Night Elven society, most gave up magecraft in favor of new vocations. Some turned to druidism, but in our case, Theta Saberfang turned to Elune. Once an admirer of Illidan Stormrage, she, along with the rest of the Night Elves, were granted immortality by the blessing of the dragons placed upon the world tree Nordersil. That tree had grown from the new Well of Eternity, created by Illidan's act of betrayal. There's a lot to process, and so Theta devoted herself to the goddess for millennia. Now, after the Third War and the destruction of Nordersil, Theta again finds herself walking her people's ancient lands as a mortal, and watching with trepidation as the Night Elves attempt to duplicate their former blessings by growing a New World tree, Teldrassil, off the coast of Kalimdor. As her sisters erect the new Temple of Elune in Darnassus, Theda cloisters herself within the Shadow Glen and prays for guidance. Even as she accepts the loss of her immortality, she struggles to maintain her faith in the face of the demonic corruption that plagues her people. Eventually, she sets out on her own, deciding to take matters into her own hands and purge the corruption in the land, only to find in the process the root of an even deeper corruption, one within the dream itself, the terrifying nightmare. Last but not least, we have the Forsaken. For this one, we're going back again to the Second War. When the Horde invaded the human kingdoms, all seven came together to create the greatest army the continent had seen since the Arathi Empire, and each of these nations were led by great men, legendary profiles, all of whom would go on to serve a greater role in the story. Among them, there was Stormwind's king, the young Varian Rin, who we all know well, Lordaeron's king, Taranis Menethil, known for his wisdom. There was also Dalen Proudmoore of Kultiris, Thoris Trollbane of Stromgarde, Gen Greymane of Gilneas, Archmage Antonidas of Dalaran, and finally, Aiden Perinold. Go on, Google him. If you can find artwork of him besides this sketch, I will pay you 10k gold. The Paranolds ruled the kingdom of Ultrak, which betrayed the Alliance during the Second War, and which was promptly sacked by the armies of Stromgarde under King Thoris. The nation is now considered defunct, and the Paranolds founded the Syndicate, a criminal organization known for its ties to Ultric royalty and for being infinitely less interesting than the Defias Brotherhood. Why does this matter? Well, amidst the eerie fog of the unnaturally quiet Tirisfal glade, the bones of the rogue, Baron Paranold, stir within death knell. His name, once the name of the royal line of the kingdom of Ultrak, is all he can remember from life, though he does not remember which member of that family he might have been. As the plague burned through Lordaeron, raising its people, this lone Paranold rose among the mindless undead. With his mind now freed from the Lich King's grasp, he swears his undying loyalty to the Banshee Queen, Sylvanas Windrunner, for as long as it's convenient for him. These two may also feel a little undercooked, but give them time. I'm sure the clever among you will be able to guess my intentions for them, but for now, let me just say that this isn't even their final form. Tabling that for now. These 6 characters will represent the adventurers, and will walk with us through the paths of vanilla and onward. As their stories progress, they will all intertwine, connect, disconnect, and at times even clash. But when the 3 paths of either faction each unite, they will do so in the form of a guild. The first, founded by Jorn in honor of his father Gavinrad, and Uther the Lightbringer's final stand in defense of the ashes of King Taranis, will be known as the Knights of the Lost Ashes, or the Ash Knights for short. Meanwhile, Magus Coldeye, after the death of Fenris, acknowledges that she cannot be the shaman of a clan with no members, and so takes a note from the likes of the Shattered Hand and the Storm Reavers, opening the ranks of her clan to all who would hunt at her side, not merely orcs. The Thunderlord clan's last shaman will declare themselves the Thunderlord Warband. I came up with that name before warbands became the thing that they are now, and I don't feel like changing it. Yeah, the Thunderslayers for short. I like to think that the Alliance got their shorthand name due to a paperwork snafu with the guild registry, while the Horde just got drunk and mispronounced their name in a tavern and it just kind of stuck on a contract. I'd initially planned to leave both sides at 3 members apiece, one for each of the story lanes presented in vanilla, but the more I considered it, it really didn't feel right to leave out the dwarves and the trolls, and not only because it excluded 2 racial perspectives, but also the perspective of a critical yet often overlooked section of our community, the crafters. Thus, the stage will also be joined by Bandus Forgefire, a former Wildhammer Griffin rider who, after losing his leg in the Third War, moved to Ironforge to take up blacksmithing and engineering. Meanwhile, Shakazan, an elderly troll crone and former shadow hunter in service to Senjin, has picked up alchemy and enchanting as a way to pass the time in her retirement. These were sort of a last-minute addition, but it allows me to include a perspective for WoW's professions, which, let's be frank, are long overdue for someone to throw them a narrative bone. And honestly, I'm sorry it's just us and our series doing it. I've not exactly nailed down where these 2 will show up in the story, but they'll be around, rest assured, and they will serve as auxiliary support for the 2 guilds. By the way, as a little fun fact, every single one of these heroes take their name from the pool of generic hero units you could generate in Warcraft 3. The only exception to this is Dexter, since gnomes don't make any meaningful appearance in Warcraft until vanilla. I tried my best with him, I hope it sounds fine. WoW has a history of pulling names from this pool every now and then for minor or mid-tier NPCs. Cordana Fellsong probably being the best example. I felt that by doing the same, it was a good way to both ground the characters in Azeroth, and to also remind everyone, and myself, that these stories aren't really mine, so to speak. That gives us a solid 8 foundational actors to carry our story. A paladin, a mage, a priest, and a blacksmith on one side, and a shaman, a hunter, a rogue, and an alchemist on the other. But there are perspectives that exist outside of the Horde and the Alliance as well. And before we wrap up, I'd like to briefly run through 3 of them. First, we have Ishri, a mysterious figure who seems to hold ties to the Dragonflights. She appears in opportune times of great need, as an envoy to both the Horde and the Alliance, and will often be instrumental in getting these 2 factions to put aside their squabbles for the greater good. She has a detached yet winsome disposition, characteristic of most bronze dragons, and again, I'm sure some of you can guess my plans for her, or could guess her true nature, but those are the sort of things she likes to keep close to her chest. Next we have the Brewmaster, Shang, a Pandaren monk and master beer brewer. This is a character I'm pulling from Warcraft RPG sourcebook, long ago declared non-canon. By the way, nobody tell Chandrid Proudmore that. You see, before the Wandering Isle, Chen Stormstout was simply from Pandaria proper. The Wandering Isle is cool, so I'm not thinking of changing that, but the tale I'm pulling from explained that there were once 3 great Pandaren brewmasters in Pandaria. For our purposes, this legend will now be a Wandering Isle story. The 3 were Hong Liu, Chongling Sing, and Xiang. The 3 of them share a friendly rivalry, and while the first 2, Hong Liu and Chongling Sing, both attached their names to their signature brew, Shang did not, preferring to let his work be anonymous for 2 reasons. 1, he felt that good beer should be able to speak for itself, and 2, if he named none of them, he could claim all the brews that did not bear the names of the other 2. Honestly, that story just makes me laugh, and I wanted to include it. In our tale, Shang is a well-known brewmaster from the Wandering Isle. He's a comrade of Chen Stormstout who also managed to leave the Wandering Isle. He springs up intermittently in order to fill any holes in either guild roster when necessary, and though he's been offered membership by both Jorn and Magus, he has formally declined in both cases, preferring to think of himself as a citizen of the world. And finally, we have a technical edition, who I don't have any real plans for, but who I wanted to include just in case. An ethereal, who goes by the name of Metzan the Peddler. This is a character I'm introducing to represent meta functions, like the auction house or transmogrifiers in the Void Bank. As I said, I don't currently have a thought for why I'd need him, but in case I ever have to address any in-game systems from a narrative perspective, I wanted a character I could ascribe those functions to who could pull off those roles, at the same time not feel out of place. Ethereals work very well for that, since they kind of feel out of place everywhere, which ironically makes them a natural fit. And yes, the name is a reference. Yes, I am a giggling fanboy. But also, there's a deleted scene from the Warcraft movie in which Chris Metzen actually cameos in Stormwind as a perfume merchant of all things. So there, another little fun fact to justify my lore inclusions. These 3 serve as more flexible allies, so I can give different roles to as the story goes on. There are times in Warcraft story where it feels weird for the Horde of the Alliance to have been involved, most often in novels or comics, which, as mentioned in previous videos, I intend to incorporate into the core story of the rewrite. I don't know exactly where these characters will feature for a while, though, again, I'm sure the sharpest among you will be able to guess at my long-term plans. But if I encounter a situation that feels like it needs a neutral hand or a bridge between the 2 factions, one or more of these 3 can fill that slot. I know that many, or even most of you listening, were not and are not avid role players. Truth be told, I've never been one either for any serious amount of time, but I've always found myself thinking of the lives my characters might have led before I got to know them as their player, and it always connected me deeper into the world. Now, none of these characters are based on any of my old tunes. They were developed, as I mentioned, to highlight obscure parts of the lore behind the playable races, but as I worked on them, I found myself really pleased with how they ended up. Hopefully these 2 groups feel like they could be your companions to run instances with. People you could chat with in guild chat, or even hang out with in the capitals between raids. I kind of picture the Ash Knights taking up lodging somewhere in the Old Town Quarter in Stormwind, not too far from the Pig and Whistle, resting and recuperating on the old cobble streets. Well, the Thunderslayers... Hargan, what do you think?
Definitely the drag, like the old drag, how it used to be before Cataclysm, when it was still dark and shaded by the cliffs, sheltered from the blazing hot Durotar sun. Just a perfect place to drink a beer and rest after a long day kicking ass.
See, the best stories, while you're reading them, you forget that you're reading them. You fall into them, and they make you want to return to them and come back and visit from time to time. They become more than a narrative. In a lot of ways, they become a comfort. They become a home. And a home isn't just an empty building. A home is familiar faces. It's friends. It's family. Forgive me if that feels a little too dragonflighty.
Home is where you sharpen your axe.
But as we set out on the next video along these 6 paths of adventure, I more than welcome you to close your eyes and imagine that you're walking the path we've created for yourself with your own 2 feet. But as a wise old man in a completely different franchise once said, it's dangerous to go alone. So we brought some friends to go on your journey with you. Never forget that whether it's for the Horde, for the Alliance, for Azeroth, or just for a cold beer, in World of Warcraft, no matter what you fight for, you never fight alone. Hargan, you want to sign us off?
Hargan smash!
We'll see you soon.